Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Finn, talking with Dr. Dan Guernsey, Senior Fellow at the Cardinal Newman Society, University Professor of Education, 17-year Catholic school principal, most recently in a Florida diocese. And we're joined to talk about the whole question of, school choice and therefore the right of parents to educate and form consciences and make practical decisions for their children. Dan, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing great. My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm always pleased to be able to reconnect with you. I want to invite you to tell us the story of what's going on in Florida pertaining to those schools and school choice funds for what the schools are doing with regard to parents and vaccination.
Sure. It's somewhat of a complex issue, but basically Florida is very generous with its school choice program. So every parent in Florida can get access to about $8,000 a year for tuition at the school of their choice. That includes Catholic schools. So the local Catholic schools all get about $8,000 per kid, and that's regardless of income. So it's an extremely generous program. But the state of Florida says that if you're going to accept vouchers, you cannot exclude people because of their vaccine status. And the challenge that comes is that for many years, the Florida Catholic Conference has held the position that in pursuit of the common good and to keep kids safe, all kids should be vaccinated in Catholic schools. So this has been the position for many years. So in Florida, if you're not vaccinated, unless you have a health exemption, you can't get into the schools. So what's changed is that post-COVID, the idea of being a vaccine policeman and the idea that, there's a one-size-fits-all vaccine policy has changed in the minds of young families. So we've got a couple of things changing. The Florida Catholic Conference policy, which was always kind of suspect, remains in place, but the state school choice funds are now tied to not excluding people because of vaccine status. And the public perception from our Catholic family has also changed insofar as they are vaccine hesitant now. So all these things have been moving together, and recently the Florida the Florida Attorney General contacted the Florida Catholic Conference and said, listen, the citizens of Florida have a right to use these vouchers regardless of vaccine status, unless there's a religious reason why they have to have it. And please let us know what that religious reason is. And that's kind of where we have it right now. We're not sure if the Catholic Conference has responded yet to the the Attorney General, but at least one bishop in Florida has responded.
The position of the Florida Catholic Conference, in light of the very explicit teaching of the Church that parents have the primary right and responsibility for the care, education, even the health, well-being of their children. I invite your comments there in terms of where the reach of legislative bodies and government ends and where the rights of parents ought to be respected.
Sure. The fortunate thing is the Church has been around for a long time and has thought through very carefully the various positions of what it calls the three societies. So in traditional church teaching, you have three societies. The first is the society of the family, then you have the society of the state, and then you have the society of the church. And each one of them has rights and responsibilities, which are exactly analogous to the present case. So obviously the first society, the family, has the intimate responsibility for the care of the individual child. They get to make health decisions. They get to make education decisions, and those cannot be compromised. Those cannot be coerced, either by the state or the church. So that's the family's right. Then the state has the right and responsibility to ensure the common good in terms of education and health. So the state has the right and responsibility to say, in order to make sure education is available to the families, we will pay for the family's educational school of their choice, which Florida is doing. Florida has stepped forward according to Catholic teaching, is saying we're going to make sure people can get to the school of their choice. And the state also has a responsibility for health because that's its expertise. It's not the family's expertise or the or the church's expertise, the state determines the good of the public health. Now, the church is the guarantor and the sole authority on moral and religious issues. So the church proclaims if what the state is doing is moral, and if what the Catholic family needs to do to attain salvation, that's the church's responsibility. So as long as we're all staying in our lanes and doing things faithfully, things work out. But if we stray from those lanes, things get complicated. So in this particular case, I would argue that the family can't be coerced. So the Florida Catholic Conference can't require vaccines as a condition of admission to a Catholic school when their child's soul is at stake, and they cannot be coerced. And then the state has a right to set the policies for school choice funds and to define the terms, like what is a religious exemption, and for what it takes to get the funds. And the church has the moral right to make the moral proclamations. So the church has made the moral proclamation that vaccines are not immoral. It is okay for Catholics to take a vaccine because any proximity to abortion, which some of the vaccines may have, is too distant. So that's a binding moral statement by the church that that vaccines are okay for us to take as Catholics. But the church also says you can't coerce people. So there's a disconnect here in the church, in the Catholic Conference's position. So that's kind of where the struggle lies.
I'm really glad you framed it so clearly, because like you mentioned, that disconnect is the issue of contention here, which is very clearly that while the church has presented in a unanimous voice, I should add, that vaccines, in as much as we don't have complete control over the way they are being produced, and so we have the right of remote cooperation with material evil, because the intent here isn't to continue to facilitate the immoral production of the vaccines. It is for the sake of mitigating the propagation of these illnesses. But parents at the end of the day reserve the prudential right to make decisions that are best for their family, both in terms of religious practice and health. So once again, I invite you to speak into that, please.
Yeah. So here's the crux of the problem. When you strip in my estimation, when you strip everything away from what's going on here, I'm going to try an analogy here. I'm not sure if it works, but let's say the state was giving away food vouchers for restaurants. The state has the right to say, okay, if you're going to take the state vouchers, you cannot discriminate against people because of their vaccine status, unless you have a religious reason, right? The challenge with the Catholic Church is if it was providing food, it would say, listen, we don't have a religious reason for requiring vaccines, but we think our customers are going to be safer in our restaurant if only the vaccinated are here. So because we want to take care of our customers and we love our customers, we don't want the unvaccinated people eating in our restaurant because they might get the others sick. When a restaurant or the church says that, it's not making a religious decision, It's making a prudential decision about the protection of its customers. Mm-hmm. But the state has a right to say, wait a minute, no, if you're going to use this voucher to provide food, you have to let people, you can't discriminate against them because of that. Mm-hmm. If you're going to discriminate, you don't get the voucher. That's kind of where this comes down to. And what the bishops what the Catholic Conference is doing, I fear, is saying, well, because we're religious, you can't tell us who we can and can't let in. And that's not really the argument, because there is no religious reason to get vaccinated. It's not a religious requirement to get vaccinated to be a Catholic. It's not a religious requirement to get vaccinated to go to CCD. It's not a religious requirement to get vaccinated to go to a CYO or to Mass or to be an altar server, right? But for some reason, they've said, we care about our kids so much, we don't want them around the unvaccinated, so too bad. And that's the wrong position, especially post-COVID, in my estimation.
Yeah, and we can all acknowledge that there's a bit of an overreaction to it, too, and therefore an overreach. We're talking with Dr. Daniel Guernsey, Senior Fellow at the Cardinal Newman Society. He's a University Professor of Education, 17-year Catholic school principal, and we're talking about vouchers and vaccines as it pertains to school choice, in particular looking at the state of Florida, but also considering this as a moral issue. We're going to continue on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Speed. I'm talking with Dr. Daniel Guernsey. He's a friend, a senior fellow at the Cardinal Newman Society, University Professor of Education, Catholic school principal for 17 years, and most recently in a Florida diocese. And we're talking about school vouchers, school choice, and vaccinations. Dan, I want to revisit one of the core points that you were making here, which is, like you've rightly stated, neither the state nor the church can mandate any one individual, let alone a family, to be vaccinated in order to receive, like you mentioned, the sacraments, the Mass, CCD, CYO, and the like. And so this unfortunate reality of overreach you had touched on, that since COVID, we are seeing a bit of an overreaction. I invite your comments here.
Yeah, it's not necessarily an overreaction. It's just the world has changed. Our market here, again, our focus is to get the kids to heaven, to get the kids, and a great way to do that is with Catholic education. So this is a life and death and a spiritual life and death matter. And so it's very important for our families, and they shouldn't have to choose between their child's physical health and their spiritual health. It's wrong for us as Catholic educators or the runners of Catholic schools to get in the way of that. So I think that's just a critical point we want to make case of. But again, what we're seeing with this generation of kids, especially post-COVID, is a significant lack of trust in institutions, including the government, including schools, including the media, and including the church. And so it doesn't serve the church well to strong-arm its people into getting vaccines, right? The church's argument about it is it seems to be part of the common good to get vaccinated if you can, because that's the justice and the common good may demand that. Well, that may be a reasonable position to take, but it's also reasonable post-COVID for some parents to have a sincere reservation about what's happening with vaccines, to have a sincere reservation about the potential toxicity or complication from these things, given new medical advances. And this idea of personalized medicine has become a part of the scene that wasn't there pre-COVID. So parents, we need to stand with them, not in front of them and getting in the way. So we're misreading the room. And again, for the church to come in as the vaccine bully, we just need to be very clear about what they're doing, right? They're saying, if we don't want the unvaccinated in our place of business, it's not for a religious reason, except for them to say, religiously, we feel responsible for making sure the children in our schools are safe. Therefore, you all have to stay out. And that, again, is the wrong position to take, in my estimation, given the circumstances that we're dealing with at this time.
And so, just going back to this issue, to the issue of the church's pronunciation, the church has the duty to pronounce morally on this issue. And admittedly, while vaccines have benefit, like scientifically proven benefit, they also fall into the realm of prudential judgment. And the church is very explicit about this.
Yes, but I think that the bishop's frustration might be, in one reading of the religious thing as well. If we, the arbiters of the religious validity of what's happening, have made a decision, how can you claim that you have a religious exemption? We've determined there's no religious objection, and there's a reasoning to that. But again, the vaccine, the religious exemption does not require you to have a sign-off from a religious body. So the idea is the state, because they set the terms of the vouchers, and they get to define the terms of what does it mean to have a religious exemption. They don't say in order to get a religious exemption, you have to go to a religious figure and get them to sign off on it. They actually interpret it quite broadly, and some legal scholars suggest it's significantly broad, that you simply have to have a religious sense that what's happening is not within your realm of comfort. Now, again, Catholics can feel that way. They may be feeling that way, inappropriately, because the bishops would say you haven't formed your conscience correctly. You formed your conscience by saying the vaccine, the proximity is too great, We're telling you, as the religious authorities, it is too great to matter at this point. So they're saying your conscience is improperly formed. It's our responsibility to form your conscience. Therefore, we can't accept, your misformed conscience. That all may be true on a theological level, but the church doesn't hold that you have to agree with every last bit of its teaching in order to attend its schools.
Mm-hmm.
So why is it this one thing that you can't, you don't accept from church teaching, and this is the only thing that can keep you out of a Catholic school? Where if you reject the virgin birth, the real presence, the authority of the bishops, you can still come to the schools. But if you it gets very complex. I think we're just stuck in an old paradigm of vaccines that the Catholic Conference hasn't been able to catch up with. And I hope they have the humility to say, okay, new situation, new data, new group of young people, what's the proper pastoral thing to do here to keep the kids safe and to get souls to heaven?
And to that end, one of the things that we also should consider is something you brought up earlier, that because of COVID and issues that some issues preceded COVID, but from COVID onwards, you've got an entire generation of parents who now have a significant sense of institutional distrust. And you've highlighted them, government, schools, and even to some degree the church. Many of them felt betrayed by these institutions. And so this kind of a coercive strong arm tactic, it not only doesn't sit well, it presents by itself a bit of a moral issue for these parents to consider.
Yes, they've been wounded, and we need to acknowledge the fact that the field has changed. So again, why are we sitting there playing the vaccine bully, which again, there's no more, that's not a virtuous place to sit anymore. There may have been a time pre-COVID where we could say, we love the children more than you do. We won't let the unvaccinated near them, unless they're unvaccinated or going to CCD or playing on CYO or at the church picnic, right? If this were really a problem, right, when you think about it, most Catholic children attend public schools. Only 16% of Catholic children are in Catholic schools. So what's it? 84% of Catholic children are in the public schools where vaccine exemptions are accepted. So now you've surrounded the majority of Catholic kids with the unvaccinated. Like, we can't play this game. Like, we're going to keep this little piece of our world safe, and have social distancing and masks and all that stuff, and then the kids are going to go out and play and be human the rest of the time. That doesn't work anymore. And so the Catholic Conference just, I think, needs to take a step back. And it's not just the Florida Catholic Conference. There are multiple other dioceses and Catholic conferences, I know, in Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, who have the same policies. Now, there are other dioceses that do allow for religious exemptions around the country. So I'm in the Chicago area, I believe Kansas. So it's not a religious issue because some Catholic dioceses allow the exemption, right? So it comes down to this prudential issue of, do we want to exclude the unvaccinated? Of course, the other challenge with this is we do accept medical exemptions in Catholic schools. So you can't get a religious exemption, but you can get a medical exemption. So theoretically, one of those dangerous unvaccinated kids is still going to be in our school. It's just she has a medical exemption. But the idea really was to protect our kids from deadly diseases. You would tell those who need medical exemptions, I'm sorry, we can't serve you either, because we're sorry, it's not your fault, but we can't have you around possibly hurting our children. That would be the logical way to go, is not do medical or religious if you were concerned about the bugs getting in, right? So I guess it's just all kind of fouled up, and you just need to get it straight. And there's a lot of people who are stuck outside of Catholic schools because of this, and it breaks their hearts. I know many personally.
And like you said, it is heartbreaking. And in a lot of ways, we can make an argument for a certain sense of injustice here toward them when they're trying to make as prudent a decision in terms of the parenting of their children as best they can.
Yeah. And then kind of from the practical, import here, usually those with the vaccines are relatively safe. It's those without the vaccines who, if they're attending a school, are in danger because they're in greater danger of getting sick. So the ones really taking the risk are the unvaccinated more than the vaccinated? So just putting that back into place too. And so typically what we do if there's an outbreak in a school, it is within our rights and responsibilities to shift all the unvaccinated outside of the school environment until it's safe for them to return. And we've been through this before, right? It happens, when we have an outbreak of measles or something, right? If we have unvaccinated, whatever, so you kind of have that risk if you're unvaccinated, if you're going to school, is that you might get sick or you might have to leave school during the time of the outbreak. But those are risks assumed by the unvaccinated. The vaccinated are generally safe.
And even that particular fact lends further credence to the risk being undertaken by those who are unvaccinated.
Yes, for the most part. There's always breakthroughs, which again, if you wanted to be super, 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 super safe, and this is one of I get it, right? From sometimes the culture of the Catholic conferences where you have, administrators and lawyers and insurance guys, and they're all thinking, how can we minimize risk? How can we be the most safe? There's this culture of safetyism that can get in there. And then you put that mantle of, I'm just super safe and super protective. Look how diligent I am in doing my. I get that temptation, and it's good to have some of that in your thinking pattern when you're serving children. But there also comes another where you just have to say we have to let the children come.
Well, I want to say thank you very much for making the time to speak with me, Dan. As usual, a tremendous source of wisdom and insight.
Thank you.
My guest has been Dr. Dan Guernsey, Senior Fellow at the Cardinal Newman Society, and he's spoken very saliently into this question of vaccine mandates and school choice for parents. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.